Chapter 10 of Barnaby Rudge. A Tale of the Riots of '80. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recorded by Mill Nicholson. Barnaby Rudge. A Tale of the Riots of '80 by Charles Dickens. Chapter 10. It was on one of those mornings, common in early spring, when the year, fickle and changeable in its youth, like all other created things, is undecided whether to step backward into winter, or forward into summer, and in its uncertainty inclines now to the one, and now to the other, and now to both at once, wooing summer in the sunshine, and lingering still with winter in the shade. It was, in short, on one of those mornings when it is hot and cold, wet and dry, bright and lowering, sad and cheerful, withering and genial, in the compass of one short hour, that old John Willet, who was dropping asleep over the copper boiler, was roused by the sound of a horse's feet, and glancing out at window, beheld a traveller of goodly promise, checking his bridle at the Maypole door. He was none of your flippant young fellows, who would call for a tankard of mulled ale and make themselves as much at home as if they had ordered a hogshead of wine; none of your audacious young swaggerers, who would even penetrate into the bar, that solemn sanctuary, and, smiting old John upon the back, inquire if there was never a pretty girl in the house, and where he hid his little chambermaids, with 100 other impertinences of that nature. None of your free and easy companions, who would scrape their boots upon the fire dogs in the common room, and be not at all particular on the subject of spittoons; none of your unconscionable blades, requiring impossible chops, and taking unheard of pickles for granted. He was a staid, grave, placid gentleman, something past the prime of life, yet upright in his carriage for all that, and slim as a greyhound. He was well mounted upon a sturdy chestnut cob, and had the graceful seat of an experienced horseman, while his riding gear, though free from such fopperies as were then in vogue, was handsome and well chosen. He wore a riding coat of a somewhat brighter green than might have been expected to suit the taste of a gentleman of his years, with a short black velvet cape, and laced pocket-holes and cuffs, all of a jaunty fashion. His linen, too, was of the finest kind, worked in a rich pattern at the wrists and throat, and scrupulously white. Although he seemed, judging from the mud he had picked up on the way, to have come from London, his horse was as smooth and cool as his own iron-grey periwig and pigtail. Neither man nor beast had turned a single hair, and saving for his soiled skirts and spatter-dashes, this gentleman, with his blooming face, white teeth, exactly ordered dress, and perfect calmness, might have come from making an elaborate and leisurely toilet to sit for an equestrian portrait at old John Willet's gate. It must not be supposed that John observed these several characteristics by other than very slow degrees, or that he took in more than half a one at a time, or that he even made up his mind upon that without a great deal of very serious consideration. Indeed, if he had been distracted in the first instance by questionings and orders, it would have taken him at the least a fortnight to have noted what is here set down. But it happened that the gentleman, being struck with the old house, or with the plump pigeons which were skimming and curtsying about it, or with the tall maypole, on the top of which a weathercock, which had been out of order for 15 years, performed a perpetual walk to the music of its own creaking, sat for some little time looking round in silence. Hence John, standing with his hand upon the horse's bridle, and his great eyes on the rider, and with nothing passing to divert his thoughts, had really got some of these little circumstances into his brain by the time he was called upon to speak. "A quaint place this," said the gentleman, and his voice was as rich as his dress. "Are you the landlord?" "At your service, sir," replied John Willet. "You can give my horse good stabling, can you, and me an early dinner? I am not particular what, so that it be cleanly served, and a decent room, of which there seems to be no lack in this great mansion," said the stranger, again running his eyes over the exterior. "You can have, sir," returned John, with a readiness quite surprising. "Anything you please." "It's well I'm easily satisfied," returned the other with a smile, "or that might prove a hardy pledge, my friend." And saying so, he dismounted with the aid of the block before the door in a twinkling. "Halloa there, Hugh!" roared John. "I ask your pardon, sir, for keeping you standing in the porch, but my son has gone to town on business, and the boy being, as I may say, of a kind of use to me, I'm rather put out when he's away. Hugh! A dreadful, idle, vagrant fellow, sir, half a gipsy, as I think, always sleeping in the sun in summer, and in the straw in winter time, sir. Hugh! Dear Lord, to keep a gentleman a waiting here through him! Hugh! I wish that chap was dead. I do indeed." "Possibly he is," returned the other. "I should think if he were living, he would have heard you by this time." "In his fits of laziness, he sleeps so desperate hard," said the distracted host, "that if you were to fire off cannon balls into his ears, it wouldn't wake him, sir." The guest made no remark upon this novel cure for drowsiness, and recipe for making people lively, but, with his hands clasped behind him, stood in the porch, very much amused to see old John, with the bridle in his hand, wavering between a strong impulse to abandon the animal to his fate, and a half disposition to lead him into the house and shut him up in the parlour while he waited on his master. "Pillory the fellow! Here he is at last!" cried John, in the very height and zenith of his distress. "Did you hear me a calling, villain?" The figure he addressed made no answer, but putting his hand upon the saddle, sprung into it at a bound, turned the horse's head towards the stable, and was gone in an instant. "Brisk enough when he is awake," said the guest. "Brisk enough, sir," replied John, looking at the place where the horse had been, as if not yet understanding quite what had become of him. "He melts, I think. He goes like a drop of froth. You look at him, and there he is. You look at him again, and there he isn't." Having, in the absence of any more words, put this sudden climax to what he had faintly intended should be a long explanation of the whole life and character of his man, the oracular John Willet led the gentleman up his wide dismantled staircase into the Maypole's best apartment. It was spacious enough in all conscience, occupying the whole depth of the house, and having at either end a great bay window, as large as many modern rooms, in which some few panes of stained glass, emblazoned with fragments of armorial bearings, though cracked and patched and shattered, yet remained, attesting by their presence that the former owner had made the very light subservient to his state, and pressed the sun itself into his list of flatterers, bidding it, when it shone into his chamber, reflect the badges of his ancient family, and take new hues and colours from their pride. But those were old days, and now every little ray came and went as it would, telling the plain, bare, searching truth. Although the best room of the inn, it had the melancholy aspect of grandeur in decay, and was much too vast for comfort. Rich rustling hangings waving on the walls, and better far the rustling of youth and beauty's dress, the light of women's eyes outshining the tapers and their own rich jewels, the sound of gentle tongues and music, and the tread of maiden feet, had once been there, and filled it with delight. But they were gone, and with them all its gladness. It was no longer a home. Children were never born and bred there. The fireside had become mercenary, a something to be bought and sold, a very courtesan. Let who would die, or sit beside, or leave it, it was still the same. It missed nobody, cared for